which I need to open as well. But for those of you who've never seen us before, I'm Chaz. That's Stu. Stu, do you want to wave so that you come up? There we go.
Well, I've got to talk, so it switches to me.
And welcome to Draft Zero Live Installation. We will tell you exactly what that is and what we're doing here in one moment, hopefully. For all of those who are joining us from Pipeline Riders, welcome. We are starting any minute now, we promise. Thanks a lot to Matt from Script Pipeline for plugging us so relentlessly during the Pipeline Riders Twitter mixer.
Cool. We're good to go, I think. Hang on, most importantly, the best sound. And that just went everywhere, so that's...
Should we play the... I don't know. I don't even know where to find it on my computer.
And you're going to have it set up.
Hi, I'm Chaz Fisher.
And I'm Stu Willis.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast where two Aussie filmmakers try to work out what makes great screenplays work.
And on this episode, we are doing Parasite, which was voted for by our patrons, who for these live, Patreons, for these live episodes are kind of able to have a input into what we're breaking down. And so why did we want to do, why were we interested in doing Parasite? I guess is a good place to start, Chaz, before we going down into the specifics.
For sure. I mean, you and I watched it together in theaters last year, back when we could do such things.
I don't think it was together.
I'm fairly certain it was together.
Okay.
At the Nova?
Where else were we going to see it? Anyway.
Look, just to let people know who are perhaps new to the Draft Zero experience, our podcast is normally somewhere between an hour and a half to up to 3 hours long, where we pick a particular theme and study lots and lots of different films and examples to elaborate and take a really deep dive into a craft topic. And one of the reasons we can do these live broadcasts weekly, as opposed to like 6 weekly, however long it takes us to get our classic podcasts out, is we are just doing one film. So it allows us to get the homework done and pump out the episodes. So why Parasite? I mean, look, we just chucked up films that we thought had good fodder in them. I didn't come into this particular exercise with a particular craft topic to analyze. I was just like, this film is exquisitely crafted from both a narrative and a visual point of view. And so, yeah, I just went into it. I'm glad our Patreons voted for it, went into it, watched it, and have come out with a thesis, which I can elaborate on in a second. But you, Stu, what called you to Parasite?
Yeah, for similar reasons. I mean, I think there might be some moments where we get to talk about the directing, because the directing is exquisite. And on second rewatch, the way the directing integrates with kind of its narrative structure is really, really tight. And obviously there's this great midpoint, turning point. Look, it goes without saying, but worth saying, spoilers abound. So that midpoint when you're going down the stairs, it was such a moment of, I literally feel the rug being pulled out of my feet, or I'm literally feeling that there is a stairway leading to a basement. You know, you feel like you're going into another film. And so originally it was like, what's the interest in that pivot? But then you structured it when we put it to our patrons. Was like, you wanted to look at the flooding sequence.
Oh yeah, that's right. There was one particular.
That was like, you're like, let's just keep it really tight. And yeah, because Draft Zero is known for its very economical approaches.
I remember when we watched it the first time together in cinemas, that the flooding sequence stood out to me so much, because the film had just been ratcheting up the tension and escalating and escalating and escalating. And then that flooding sequence just seemed to kind of come out of nowhere. And it's one of the things that set the film apart. It felt very not part of the traditional, 3-act structure, Western storytelling narrative. And so that's why I wanted to look into that particular sequence. But upon revisiting the film, I've kind of realized that the power of that sequence is the question that Boon Jong-ho and what was the other writer's name before we...
Jin-Won Han. And obviously, if we're going to be butchering these names more than usual, like Chaz might sink to my very low Well, it's not even standards. My basement dwelling, my sub-basement dwelling.
Apologies to anyone who actually speaks Korean and to the entire Korean people, because we are really going to butcher the names. But what I would like to do in this episode is actually break down the sequences of the film from the perspective of what questions the filmmakers are asking or prompting the audience to ask.
Yeah, so I guess what that means is that it's kind of building on what we were talking about last week, to be honest. That where it's something that we keep on coming back to as narrative point of view, that we keep on coming back to this idea of questions, sequence questions, scene questions, right? We've done multiple podcasts on this, and I think we're kind of deepening our understanding of that kind of craft tool and how fundamental it is. And even though we say this feels like it's not particularly Western, the fact is it's very sequence heavy, that they are kind of divided in chapters, and there's tools that the writers and the filmmakers use to make it feel not episodic. But when you actually start breaking down into clear sequences, you're like, oh, okay. And, you know, from a construction point of view, how do you write something? Breaking it down into sequences and is a way to make it approachable, right? You know, that obviously writing a 120-page script can feel daunting, particularly when you're first starting out. But thinking, oh, all I have to do is write, 10 sequences that are much shorter only. But, it makes the task manageable. But it's also part of the kind of ebb and flow of watching a film.
Yeah.
There's, as I mentioned last week, there's this idea of contrast infinity that I've been teaching my motion design students about that I think applies to narrative, that you want the sequences all have a kind of a different tone to them, a kind of different feeling, and it makes it more watchable. Like this idea of reels, coming back to the Stephen Cleary episode, we spent a lot of time talking about reels, but there's this idea of a unit of storytelling that people can kind of follow being like 20 minutes, it's kind of our concentration. I'm completely unscientific. I'm just pulling a number. Like if I wanted to make it sound more accurate, it'd be like, so it's been shown that the average kind of like length of concentration on the film is like 21 and a half minutes. And it's going to just make it sound more, like what I'm talking about. But by moving them and interlocking them, and there's like overlap between these sequences, you can kind of keep the audience engaged. And then you escalate into like the going down the stairs moment. And it's kind of makes the audience who's just been kind of like, oh, cool. I'm, in a way waiting for this story to be over. And then you're like, boom, hit them with this kind of real revelation. So let me, hang on.
So just to,
so this is the moment that I think, sorry, we're jumping ahead, but this is the moment where it feels like you've seen this shelf multiple times. They've planted it really well. And then you see it open and you're like, holy crap. And then they play it as a classic horror follow shot without cutting. And you literally feel a sinking feeling in your stomach.
Yeah.
This is great. And this gives the film momentum to carry into the second half.
Yeah. Well, just to clarify what I'm trying to get to is, so we previously, with a wonderful friend and multiple guests of the podcast, Stephen Cleary, we've done a whole episode, I think 2 actually, on different kinds of sequences. So whether the sequence is driven by a plot question, whether it's got multiple like plot and character questions, whether it's just got character questions, and if you don't even pose any plot question or any character question to be answered, then what bubbles up naturally is in the vacuum of a question that the audience is asking, what then happens is that the audience starts interacting directly with the filmmaker and asking themselves, what is this all about? Why am I watching this? And we also did this in films. We did a series on antagonists, and the final one was versus the audience, where the filmmakers are directly antagonizing the audience. They're directly communicating with the audience. And I think
that almost our expectation of the genre and the narrative structure is the opposition to the audience. So being the force of opposition, that it uses our understanding against it. So I mean, it's more complicated. It's real work. It's really worth listening to our episode.
But look, my broader point is I'm just trying to sow some seeds about what we're discussing later. But I think what elevates this film is that they are in such mastery of when they want the audience leaning forward and asking plot questions, and when they just let the audience sit back and go, why have I just seen all of that? What is coming? And I don't know. And the filmmakers, down to the moment by moment control of those questions, is something that really elevates this film. So should we go
back to the stuff and summarize the film?
Yeah. So if you head back to the PowerPoints here, we've got the logline from IMDb, and then we can also introduce the characters.
I already got a bit of back channel from a friend of mine, which was, PowerPoint, you disappoint me. So apologies.
Who was it, Stu, who said we needed a PowerPoint?
Jess, you.
No, I mean from
my dad.
Between the two of us.
You were questioning whether you wanted to.
Yeah.
Mate, at least I can kind of draw things on the PowerPoint, which, well, yes. But what else are we going to use? Pages. It's not the PowerPoint that's the issue here. It's not even like you've used cheesy slide transitions. Anyway, so you can summarize the film. Chaz did the design on this.
That is so unfair. That was your job to do the design, and you just didn't do it. You said, chuck the info in there and I will do the aesthetic. So for new watchers or listeners, part of the Draft Zero experience is Stu and I bickering like an old married couple. But anyway, so as the IMDb logline does quite well, it's the film Parasite is about a poor family, the Kims, con their way into becoming the servants of a rich family, the Parks. But their easy life gets complicated when their deception is threatened with exposure.
Which is what's interesting about that logline is it's literally giving you the midpoints there. Like their easy life. That is where the story changes. So it's like, here's the first half of the film. And here's the second half, which is a really interesting way of thinking about a logline.
Okay, so let's introduce our cast of characters whose names we are going to butcher spectacularly.
Wait, hang on. I have to undo the annotation and then maybe.
Stu, master of drawing things on PowerPoint. So here is the Kim family, the poor family.
That's to you, Jazz. My excellent sketch. How you still have it.
I mean, one of the things that we'll also tackle in this as we break it down is different characters drive different sequences. They're in charge, and that has a different effect on the audience as well, in terms of their experience on the characters. So it's hard to say who's the protagonist of this movie, because it really seems to be this whole family, the Kim family. So
going back just to the rule of thumb, I would say that it's kind of like a collective protagonist. But I think in terms of the person whose decision drives the seeming events, it's Kiwoo. It's Kevin makes it's the recruitment scene, which we've talked about. The, hey, I've got a mission, you accept the mission. So he is kind of ostensibly the protagonist. But as we've talked about on other episodes, you can have sequence protagonists, you can have scene protagonists. And this feels like very much they function as a unit. And really it's the Kims as the protagonist and the Parks as the antagonist, the force of opposition. But that will change.
Completely. So yes, we've got Kiwoo / Kevin, which is his English name given to him by the Parks in a wonderful little sort of show of status. Like, oh, we should call you Kevin. That will be your name. Ki-tak, who's referred to as Mr. Kim by the Parks, Chang-suk, the mother, and Ki-young or Jessica as the sister / daughter of the Kim family. And then the Park family, Dong-ik is the patriarch. Yep. Yong-kyo is the mother. Da-hae and Da-sung are the kids. So hopefully Stu's dad, if you're watching, this has been sufficient visual cues to orient you as we start diving into the actual story.
It was his request, when he sent me a message saying we watched your live stream and the first 50 minutes was pretty boring.
Because that's me paraphrasing.
Visuals. Yeah. I've seen you, son, a lot. I don't need to see you on my computer screen.
Okay. So the opening sequence is a lot of it's establishing, and in any kind of film, really, the opening sequence questions are pretty fundamentally the same. You're trying to orient the audience in the story. So, who are we watching, and like, what do they want, essentially? And the opening sequence and introduction to the Kims is a wonderful bit of them. They've been cut off from their Wi-Fi because they've been stealing the neighbor's Wi-Fi, and they've finally been password protected. They're trying to find Wi-Fi so they can get a job folding pizza boxes. It's establishing, there's so much incredible establishing of their basement apartment that becomes really important later.
The directing in terms of teaching you the geography of these environments is amazing. Like I'm like the whole way through, like it's just just gives me the
and it establishes things like the fact that the mother was like an Olympic gold medalist, a silver medalist or something in hammer throw or something, but yet they find themselves in this position. They're clearly struggling financially. They've got a stink bug infestation in their apartment. And I think one of the amazing sort of visuals is them folding pizza boxes while letting street fumigation come into the apartment to kill the stink bugs, and they're also choking while they're doing it. So, Stu, what questions do you think the audience are asking themselves?
I think where you start with any story, it's coming back to, and again, this is a Cleary thing. It's the who are we watching? Who are these people? What world are we in? What time are we in? Yeah. You know, we're trying to learn who these characters are. That's the audience question. The plot question that they execute this through is, it's kind of two halves. Can they find a Wi-Fi signal? That's the plot question that it's set up, yeah. Right? And then it becomes, it shifts us a little bit behind. Why are they folding these boxes? And then the plot question is, will these boxes be accepted, I guess? But do we know?
Is that even a plot question? We don't even know that they're going to be accepted or rejected until that happens. Like the pizza shows up and says, we're going to dock your pay because 1 in 4 have failed this.
Yeah, so it's this idea, but I guess that's the question is like, what are they doing? Why are these folding boxes? They say they're going to get paid. It kind of is just teaching us who the family is. So it's if the audience question is, who are these people and what are their circumstances? What are their given circumstances?
Yeah.
To use a term we haven't talked about for a while. That's up here. That's all this opening, like 5 minutes, but it is really it's a mini sequence until we get to the
friend Min.
Yeah. And then you can actually feel the chapter break.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so, sorry, can you stop distracting me by showing me the movie?
Yeah, Chaz just shuts up. Give him that subtitle. Give him that subtitle. You're just like, I can just
sit back and watch. Like, how about we just watch Parasite? So, yeah, basically what it says that they want is money, right? They are poor and they want money.
Well, they need, it's not that they want money. I would say it's what appears to be the need. And there's something that I'll plant in now that I think is very clever about the world building in this, is that given that this film in some ways is about class, well, not some way, in a lot of ways is about class. It's about that, like it's weaving in not just their story, but how it relates to the overall circumstances in Korea. There is a version of this film, if they remake this, which they are, aren't they? It's like going to be like,
I don't know.
No, haven't you heard there's like an American miniseries remake?
Dear. I heard there was a TV series, but I thought it was just going to still be in Korea. I didn't realize they were setting it in America.
No, I'm pretty sure it's American. But they would be like open with like unemployment statistics.
Yeah.
Right. Because what you're going, they're poor. Why is the whole family out of work? Blah, 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 blah. And that is about our relationship to the characters, because we're not sure, is this something that they found themselves in? You know, we've got culturally, and I'm looking at this as a Westerner.
Yeah.
I don't know the circumstances in Korea, but there is this kind of weird, you know, that I was going to say Protestant, you know, that prosperity principle that seems to be dominating kind of Anglo-American politics at the moment. That idea that they're poor because they kind of deserve it, right?
Yeah.
And that they're con men and shady because there's something in who they are as people. But over time, they shift the world view around the characters to change it. But that is related to the point. My point is that is actually related to the audience question, because I think when we come into any film, where we start is, who am I watching? Like, what am I watching? Who am I watching? What are the given circumstances of these characters are? Because that's what the first act is. It's the given circumstances, the inciting incident that changes them out of the circumstances. You need to establish what that is. So I think, like, on a instinctive, not instinctive is the wrong word, like, because we've heard stories so long, it's intuited or it's constructed. Our expectation is that the first 20 minutes of the film is giving us the given circumstances.
But this film does it so quickly, and there's so much setup for what pays off later in the film that we mentioned it last week. We would love to do an episode just on how to do setups and payoffs. And this film is a masterclass in that. But yes, as you said, Min, a college friend of Kiwoo's, well, Kiwoo hasn't gone to college, but I guess high school friend, but who's gone to college. He is tutoring a girl in English. He's about to go overseas, and he wants Kiwoo to tutor the girl in English. And he's chosen Kiwoo specifically because he does not feel threatened by Kiwoo as a potential romantic threat, because he wants to. I'm going to use the word grooming, and that's possibly the wrong kind of word, but Min wants to date this girl that he's tutoring English once she's in college, once she's finished high school. And so he's using Kiwoo to kind of be a protective tutor who won't get in the way of his aspirations.
There's a subtle status thing there. It's that he doesn't see Kiwoo as a threat.
Yeah.
Right. And what's interesting, because you talked about the foreshadowing of the pizza box in the Slack chat, and I just want to, because I found the image, but it's this great moment here with the, and this is directorial, but you can write, this would probably be written on the page, and you're the one who's looking at the script, so it'd be interesting to see what they write. But literally, it starts off with Kiwoo around the pizza box girl, and then one by one, the family start surrounding her until she gives in.
Yeah.
We're actually seeing the dynamic of the family is that they kind of attack as a herd, if you know what I mean. Like, they're pack hunters in a horrible way. But we're seeing that them literally crowd the frame. And I love, like, this is just a directorial thing, but given that we've finally got visuals in Draft Zero, I can talk, about directing, like the fact that they're cropping the frame, keeping her, in the middle. It kind of, you can really feel her getting trapped. Yeah. If you play this wider, or you just a little bit wider, or move to off center, you wouldn't have that same feeling. So this is this is what I mean about the directing working hand in hand with the narrative purpose that they're going after. Like, it's not just about being slick.
I'll open up the moment in the script, and we can talk briefly about the script.
Yeah.
So could you stop sharing?
I can just hit the clear button. These annotation tools must come from Zoom.
I guess so.
Yeah, that's cool. So I can draw stuff. Stop share.
Okay, so I am going to share the script. Now, this is the For Your Consideration script. And unlike last week with Knives Out, I'm not entirely sure we will dive into the script as much as we'll dive into the actual film. And there's a few reasons for this. Obviously, the script would have been written in Korean. And this is, it was interesting. I read through it, and it's definitely not a transcription of the finished film in English, right? It's clearly been written as a script, and I think you told me they had a translator working with them as they developed the script, because
let's develop the script. She just hung out with the director, Sharon Choi. She kind of was at him at all the award ceremonies, etc. And he was really using it's cool. It's a cool story. He was really using his position to go, she's an amazing filmmaker. Everyone should be interested in what she's doing. She's helping me because she speaks English. I'm going to take briefly control.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can just screen share. Like, Sharon Choi, is that coming through?
Yeah.
Cool, because it just showed me the Drafts webpage in the background. So I wonder, it was just purely speculation that maybe she helped with the translation, because I can imagine in a a mentorship. It's like, hey, you know English, translate my script. That's a really good opportunity for you to understand what I'm doing structurally. And that if she is someone that is a writer and a filmmaker in herself, she's going to feel a responsibility to kind of communicate the intent rather than literally just putting it through Google Translate because, hey, Oscar voters don't read scripts.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the script for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So what made me feel like I was actually reading a script was that there were some subtle differences, like scenes that there was more to them that would have been cut off in the edit. So clearly it had been written not on the basis of the finished film, which was really nice. And then I'm in the semi-basement during the fumigation scene. And if you see here, they've introduced the YouTube video of the world's fastest pizza box folder after the fog has come into the room. So this is just making me feel like this was, a genuine script before the film, got produced. But if we're looking at the moment that you're talking about, so it does infer the order and the blocking, but nowhere near as precisely as you're talking about in the direction. So Kiwoo is helping load the boxes into the van. Ki-Tek, the father, looks out from the apartment window, watching Chung-Suk squabble with the pizza shop owner. Now,
this doesn't read like a direct, like someone's put some love into this.
Oh yeah, this is a good script, like as it's written. And then Kiwoo steps in quickly steps in, diffusing the situation with an easy smile, right? And it then has Ki-Jung, the sister, there in the conversation, but she hasn't been introduced in big print, and we don't have any line around, how trapped they're feeling. We've got the owner just stares at the smiling siblings. What the hell are these people, in italics? Although, Stu, here you go. The owner senses a trap and tries to get out of it. She takes out a few bills from her fanny pack and starts counting one by one. The family all stare. It's been a while since they've seen money.
It's interesting because I think it just goes from the money being counted out of the fanny pack to them celebrating with like eating chip packets and stuff. But that's it's been a while since they've seen money. Oh, what a beautiful piece of action description.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, we've got an amazing establishing sequence. Then Min has come through, like that's the inciting incident. He's offered the opportunity to Kiwoo. Kiwoo then goes to the house, right? And the question that kind of gets posed, because as you said, we've got another beautiful tracking shot introducing us to the geography of the house and how startling, like the green and the colors are, the wood colors of how different they are to the Kim's life in the semi-basement. And the mother, God, what was her name?
Let me quickly.
The park mother.
The park mother,
Yongkyo.
Yongkyo.
So Yongkyo then says, I want to sit in on the lesson to see whether you're good enough, to measure up to your friend Min's standards. And it becomes, the plot question is, will Kiwoo get this job? Right? Very simple and very dramatizable as well. So Kiwoo does get the job. And then Yongkyo is talking about her son, Dasong, and how he goes through art teachers like there's no tomorrow. And there's this beautiful shot of Kiwoo, Kevin, getting the idea that he could get his sister hired as the art teacher. You can see it occurring to him.
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to find it because I stood out to me just what was really interesting about the directing is we came back, we talked about this on Unfilmables. How do you dramatize characters making decisions?
Yeah. Right?
Choices that are internalized. And obviously you can do it on the page because you can write, things considers then, we talked about ways to do that. But okay, I've actually found roughly the moment, so I'm going to share it. But it's also the question is how do you do it with the camera? And there's obviously the classic kind of push in, right? But they do more than that in this film. There's lots of little dollies, little moments where they literally twist the line, like change the line. Here we go.
It just happened to him. Like you just showed it. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it's done in blocking. It's done in camera. He literally look. They've timed that, so he literally takes a step.
Yeah, and he's smiling like he's thinking. An
It's
idea
tilted.
comes to him. He smiles.
And it's like it's just it's classic kind of over the shoulder turning around, like it's a two shot, but you get the power difference, him being a lower, but it's that combination of performance and writing and acting. But what's interesting about this, and it's worth saying because this whole sequence. It's something that we talked about last week in the context of the Gentleman Sleuth, the Daniel Craig character. What's his name?
Benoit Blanc.
Yeah. That the character that he feels there's this moment where we're behind him and then we're ahead of him, and it changes our relationship to whether we think he's smart. Essentially, boiling down that last week is we think detectives are smart, or characters in general, when we're catching up to them, when they seem ahead of us. And what's interesting about Parasite is we don't realize that we just think he's being opportunistic here, that he's just seizing the moment, and it feels so in the moment. But as will come out on this sequence, it's a plan. We are learning, and that makes them, the Kims, seem really smart. And it makes the madam, as the friend said, seem kind of dumb.
Yeah, but also what it does is, so during the sequence, you're absolutely right, and we'll show you the moments when it happens. But at the beginning of the sequence, we are with Kevin and we are with Jessica, in that from a narrative point of view, in that the audience knows no more than the character does, and we are experiencing things in time with them, right?
We don't think we know more than the character.
Right, exactly. Okay, but it is putting us in empathy with the characters. We want them to succeed. We're on their side, right? It doesn't feel like they're conning their parks. It feels like they are taking advantage of opportunities, right? And then when we realize it's a plan, when the filmmakers choose to tell us that we're actually behind these guys, we are kind of on board and liking them and wanting them to succeed anyway. And now we think that they're really smart because they're ahead of us.
Yeah, so I think it does two things. One, we've already been told that Kevin is good at what he does. So it's more like he hasn't got into college, possibly because he doesn't have money, right, to afford college. So he's down on his luck, but he's otherwise a deserve. Coming back to our perception of class in these characters, right? And that we've seen that Jessica, we've had that whole sequence where she fakes the diploma, and they're like, oh, wow, it'd be great if you could go to art school. And you're like, oh, maybe she is actually a really good artist and knows what she's talking about. She just hasn't had opportunity. And then it turns out what they specifically point out is that she just kind of made it up.
Yeah, she Googled it. And so, okay, let's go through just a couple of beats before we get to that point where it shifts, okay? So we've got the sequence. The dramatic question has been answered. Will Kevin get the job? Yes, Kevin has got the job. And at the end of that sequence, he gets the idea, oh, I can get my sister a job, right? And then the next sequence question is, will Jessica get the job, right? And Jessica gets the job. And then there's this an amazing moment in the car when she gets the idea. And it feels like, again, that it's occurring to her in the moment, that she can set up the driver by leaving her panties in the car, and that the driver can get fired and her dad can get hired as the driver, right?
And we already get, and they do a great job of, we're kind of like, the driver's been slightly insistent about driving her home. And I think they've done a good job with, like, is he being genuinely nice, or is he being a quote unquote nice guy? You know, is he being a bit of a shit? And they do a really nice job where you're not quite sure. I think he is being, it's believable that he's being slightly sleazy, right? And that she feels like, and I think it's because she's a woman as well, that I naturally go there, that like her having to mention the boyfriend and him insisting, there's kind of a threatening aspect to it that makes her planting a trap for him feel validated.
Yeah, it doesn't put us offside on the character, right? So that's the key thing. They made the decision to keep us in the same narrative point of view as the characters, feel like we're in the same narrative point of view as the characters. up until this point, and it's the very scene after this one where she's laid the trap that they're having lunch in a cafe, the whole family, and as you pointed out, it's this recurring motif of the plan, right? And oh, Stu.
I'm having way too much fun with adaptations. We should have done this a long time ago.
Okay, so the family are all together, and suddenly, I think Kiru has a line like, "Oh, we're accelerating with the plan. We're moving forward," and that is exactly the point, as you say. We've shifted the narrative point of view. Suddenly, we realize that they are ahead of us, and they're not doing this opportunistically as it occurs to them. They have a plan to get the whole family involved.
Because where have they chosen to show it, right? We've already got a little bit of sympathy to them. They might be eroding that sympathy, but it's not like we're starting with negative. We've got sympathy and they've stepped us back.
Yeah.
Right? And even this like crazy bitch, I couldn't believe it. We're like, oh, okay, maybe they're not super likable, but we've got more sympathy than we would otherwise. Yeah. Right?
Okay. So it's at exactly this point in the film where I was watching with my wife. She hadn't seen it before, and she said out loud, I wonder how they're going to get the mother employed. Will she replace the housekeeper? Right? And so it was wonderful having my wife next to me, because she was saying out loud the questions that the director exactly wants us to ask. So it's been so well set up as a series of episodic dominoes that suddenly it's like, well, we know what is going to happen, right? The film is teaching us to know what is going to happen. And so the question we start asking isn't what is going to happen, but how are they going to pull this off?
Right. And then you can feel, right, during the directing of the sequence, that it moves out of more of a real time. It becomes more abstract. There's a better terminology. It definitely starts like you've got the slow motion of her picking up the peach. It's not a montage, but it's certainly not a dramatic moment by moment retelling of how they do this.
Well, they're
it's
also
heightened.
In the voiceover, the plan is being told to us in voiceover as we're watching it being enacted.
Yeah. So it's because and this is how they keep the audience interest, right? Coming back to that principle, that they know that if they just repeat the same thing, where it's like them just playing it beat by beat of how they get the job, it's kind of going to lose interest. They have to find a narrative and visual, a directorial way of making this exciting.
Yeah. And so it's a wonderful sequence. The setups and payoffs are amazing. Like you said, the sequence starts with them eating pizza and putting hot sauce on the pizza, and then culminates with the hot sauce being the way that they get the housekeeper fired by pretending she has tuberculosis. So
it's the joy, it's the fun of the games. Like we've basically been told in this beginning of this sequence, kind of what ends the previous sequence and starts this one. So this is what, when we'll break it down more thoroughly in our proper Draft Zero Classic episode on set-offs and payoffs. For me, a reversal is a payoff that becomes a new setup, right? So the payoff to that whole, like this is the overlapping chapters. We end Jessica's story with setting up the panties, which is how they get the driver. Yep. And then it also then we sit down and have them talking about what happened, but then sets up the question, this is an overlap, how are they going to get the mother installed, right? And then it's the fun and games. Now that we know they're a family of crooks, how are they going to work together? It's that them surrounding like the pizza driver. And it's the joy, and it doesn't have to sustain for a long time, but it's not like there needs to be, like the dramatic question is, are they going to succeed? And the answer we're going to assume is yes. Right.
Yeah,
but it doesn't take away. It's like Ocean's 11.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But so far,
and it's learning
we've got a series of plot questions. We've got, initially, it's just introducing the characters and their needs. Then it's, will Kevin get the job? Yes, no. Right? Simple, easy, dramatizable answer. Will Jessica get the job? Yes, no. Will Mr. Kim get the job? Yes, no. And then it's like, how will they install the mother? So it's not like as you say, it's not a question that's driving us. It's sitting back and enjoying how it plays out.
So there's probably like a rule of thumb about how, maybe it's like 7.5 minutes of how long you can sustain a question that you know the answer to. But there's the mystery of how, as you say, how are they going to do it? That's what does it.
But then you've got to the end of that. They're all installed, and the film does not then, for quite, like, it's got a number of scenes. It's got a chunk in there where there's no plot question posed at all, right? Like,
ooh, I disagree with that, Chaz.
Okay. Because I think, like, the plot question is generally, well, now what happens?
No, I think it starts and I'm going to bring up, because it goes out of its way, right? So we definitely got the fun and games of them getting them installed, right? But once they're all in there, right? This is the kind of the classic genre. Okay, we're beginning to see it in the car, right? Which is when he's like eyes on the road. Mr. Kim is beginning to crack. And this comes back to your idea that the pizza scene with them folding the pizza is a bit of a foreshadowing. We know that 25% of those pizza boxes weren't folded correctly, right? Someone, or maybe them collectively, they weren't 100%. There are flaws in their ability. So when Mr. Kim, in the script,
in the actual script, this didn't play in the movie, but in the script, it's very clear that Mr. Kim was responsible for the 25% failures entirely. Like, it was all.
Oh, right.
So, I mean, if you want, I can bring up the line.
That's good, because it is definitely, that is the idea, that he is the one that is the most, his desire to win, which is he wants his wife installed. Hold
on, I'm talking about the plot question stops after the wife is installed. So you're still
but I'm saying it's set up because Mr. Kim is almost giving the game away, right? He's like eyes on the road, and you can see the way I interpreted this scene is that the father, Mr. Park, is beginning to go, hang on, why are you so invested in this? So Mr. Kim turns it around and goes, it's an opportunity for you to play the good husband. It's definitely a status play, right? Like, coming back to our status episode, that there's this idea that he's trying to make the dad look good and that makes him a better driver. But it's definitely like Mr. Kim is beginning to look over his shoulder a lot. And so I think this sequence here, and I'm playing it, right? They're too comfortable, right? So it starts with here, and it's like one to the other. She, and it's particularly the parents, passes them here, squeezes the ear, clear that they haven't been noticed, right? And then when she comes down, Mr. Kim squeezes her butt.
Yeah.
Right. And we're going now, they're too comfortable in their success.
Okay. So what do you think the plot question is being posed by this little sequence?
When I think it starts up the next plot question. When and how are they going to get caught? We know, just based on the length of the movie, we're 50 minutes in. Even if we're not looking at our watches during the cinema, we know that the film has to have somewhere else to go. And we're going to assume at this point, the active question becomes, it's not the midpoint, but the active question becomes, when are they going to get caught? Or more specifically, how are they going to get undone?
Yeah.
They're grifters, right? Like, has there been many movies where the grifters succeed? Yeah.
So you think, to me, it's much less, it's definitely a question, because he goes up, so Dasong smells them, and the introduction of the idea that there's a smell of poverty is introduced. And the very next scene is them at home talking about the smell, like in the basement, that it's the semi-basement smell, and what are they going to have to do? So, all right, I think you're right. I think it's posing the question, how long are they going to get away with this? Like, how are they going to get caught, perhaps?
Yes.
But it's certainly not as clear or driving or tense a moment as a question as the previous sequences have been. And it also, because that question isn't posed, or it's not as overriding, it actually becomes, there are more character questions being raised. They've now installed themselves, and now you start going, who are these people? What do they want now that they've gotten what they've set out to achieve?
All right. So And this
I'm just going
relates
to grab
to
my beer. Hold on 1 second.
Okay, now I've got to carry the conversation. That's so difficult. So Tall Paul asks us, where do we see the break in the two? And I think these are related questions. And this is perhaps what Chaz is saying, that this doesn't feel so much as a 3-act film, but it's certainly a sequence-based film, because it feels like there's 2 ways you can think about where the act break into 2 is. There's the when they decide, like when Kevin is asked into the house. But that's like the inciting incident. I actually think the act break into 2 is when the audience is caught up that this is a plan. Mm-hmm. Right, then it's when Jessica plants the undies, the cheap panties, in the back of the car, because that's an active choice by Jessica, and then as it turns out, the whole family, to try and get them all in there. Whereas before, it just seems like Kevin is being lucky, right? It's not a choice. He's being offered, oh, hey, do you happen to know anyone? And he's just like, oh, just talking shit. And then what we learn is they've actually are hatching a plan, right? Right. So this relates to this, because the act 2 leads us to this midpoint, which is once they're in, it's this, when is the plan going to get undone, right? Yeah. And therefore, the sequence question changes and it escalates, because we need the stuff about them like touching each other, et cetera, et cetera. So it builds us into, and it's beautifully directed. So when Darsong is like, you smell the same, we go, oh, fuck, because them realizing that they shouldn't touch each other is something that people, as COVID has taught us, can learn how to do, right? Yeah. But changing your smell, you just don't smell right, Chaz.
So I think you're right. Okay. I'm not saying there's a complete absence of plot questions at this point, but it definitely takes its foot off the gas in terms of setting very easily dramatic plot-driven questions. And one of the scenes that I want to get to, and I think we've got a still in the PowerPoint. It then has the scene where they're at home and the guy that keeps pissing through their window is back. And instead of them just sitting back and letting him piss in the window, they go out and
they've been empowered.
Yeah.
They've been empowered.
Right. And so it's not these 2 scenes. Yes, there's that, like, it's starting to ask the question, how will these guys get caught? But it's nowhere near as prevalent, that question, as in the next sequence when the Parks go camping. I think the filmmakers deliberately just take their foot off the brakes for a second and say, they've got what they want. Now look at who these people are now that they've got what they want. And it actually starts posing character questions from the audience rather than plot questions. It's like, who are these people? Are they arrogant? Are they, Okay,
I managed to take you stop. And this actually proves my point. There is a difference between taking your foot off the accelerator and hitting the brakes. Mm-hmm. They take the foot off the accelerator, so there isn't that driving forward momentum, but they're not hitting the brakes. They're not doing a U-turn like they do with going down the basement. Mm-hmm. That's why, and they do that by making the question, just making sure that we can fixate on those moments of them like pulling the ear and grabbing the bum, and then the smell that we're like, oh shit, they may come undone. We don't know when that is. It is not a question defined like time box. There's not a very specific urgency to it, right? Yeah. But it's there. And as Paul says, this also foreshadows the rain. You're absolutely right, mate. Like, there is so much setup and payoff in this. It's exquisite, and the foreshadowing is definitely part of it, because that's the rock. Like, that's the rock that brings them wealth, the landscape rock, right? And there's a lot of symbolism around that, to the point when he is thinking of using the rock to beat this guy, which adds that brutal violence, but also reminds us that the rock exists, right? Which is important. So we're like, the rock exists. And this is a culture in which, I'm not as familiar. Well, I'm not as familiar with like Korean religion as I say like Japanese, but I'm assuming it's related to Shinto, right? That it's a pantheistic religion. But there's elements of kind of like, and please correct me if I'm completely speaking out of my ass, but that idea that it's not unusual to believe that rocks can imbue them with luck and wealth and all those things. So which is possibly why like Korean and in general Asian horror films are so great, is because we know that the characters take this seriously, right? In the same way that the reason that I think in the West The Exorcist worked is, even if people are non-believers, culturally you know, a lot of the West is Judeo-Christian. So taking that shit really seriously kind of makes it resonate in the way that the characters take the supernatural. Anyway, that means the foreshadowing has a certain kind of element to it.
Yeah. So what the next sequence, there's clearly a plot question gets posed, like the one that you suggest. So the next scene or large sequence is the Parks go away camping for Da Song's birthday, and the entire Kim family comes to the house and starts like getting drunk and eating all the food. And we are watching that scene, and as an audience, we are going, when are the Parks going to come home? Like, just the expectation is they're going to get caught, right?
It's a great. I mean, you can see it as cliche. Like, it's very. We know the beat, right? We know that they're going to come home, and it actually makes that midpoint where the ex-housekeeper turns up so unexpected, because it's actually working against our understanding. Yeah. We assume at this point, when the rain starts coming down, that it's literally going to be that they're going to be really drunk and the Parks are going to come back.
Yeah.
But in terms of the interlocking of how these work, the walkie-talkies are part of that earlier section when he walks in carrying all the presents, right? And the walkie-talkies are in there, and he's like, oh, he's bought walkie-talkies for a reason. And the answer is because they're going camping. But it's just like using the kind of setups as a way of stitching these episodes together, so it feels more like something that is flowing.
But in that scene where they're getting drunk in the living room, the Kim family, because we've got the threat of the Parks coming home, because the audience are like ahead of the Kims, we're like, the Parks are going to come home. That's how this works, right? They are going to get caught. And so because the plot question is creating tension and dread, it actually gives the filmmakers the space to explore the characters for a while. And that dialogue scene goes on for quite some time in the scene before the doorbell rings, and it starts bubbling up like who they are as characters. So Kiwoo starts talking about, marrying into the family. They actually explore the point that you were talking about in terms of Ki-Tek with it starts getting into class, but before it gets in, or as it gets into class, it's also actually getting into character. Ki-Tek feels sorry for the driver they fired. He asks himself, did he get a job? And Ki-Jung says, don't worry about him, worry about us, right? So as the plot question is clearly established, this is a plot character sequence, right? It is allowing who the characters are to bubble up into to permeate the film, right? And then it starts becoming about class, because they start talking about the mother, Yongkyo, and he says, "Oh, she's nice, even though she's rich." And then I think Chung Suk says, "She's nice because she's rich."
It's interesting, and then it's the generational thing there. I'm only picking that up now, that Mr. Kim is the one who's like asking where the driver is. And he's the one that earlier says we are lucky that everyone is employed when there are 500 university graduates going for a security guard job. And it's something like, okay, these people are poor because it's just a really, obviously maybe unemployment's really high. It's really competitive job market, et cetera, right? And the kids have a different attitude to parents, in the same way that the mum is then, as you say, specifically points out that it's easier to be nice when you're rich.
Yeah. So we've got this.
This is important though. Yeah. This is really important because exactly it's just before the midpoint, and they're confronted. Their values are being confronted. Their separate worldviews are being confronted.
The only reason they have this space to have this long dialogue-driven scene that starts out revealing character and prompting the audience to ask character questions, and then actually becomes like, the scene goes on for so long that the audience might start going, what is this film about? Why are we watching this family, right? It deliberately does that. It takes a breath because it's allowed to do so because you've got that threat, and then the doorbell rings and the plot like slams back on, and all the theme and character questions disappear for a second. It's then like, holy fuck, what, who's at the door? And you assume it's the Parks, and it turns out, as you say, to be the housekeeper. And as you say, that's the midpoint. And this sequence it's like you said, it's a fucking horror movie. Like, my wife Anna was like covering her eyes, not wanting to watch. There's this wonderful shot of the housekeeper wanting to go down into the basement of the house, and she says in an almost like mad cackle, "Want to see?" So I don't know. And Anna's like, "Oh God, don't go down into the dark room." And it's, I mean, the way that this house is lit is amazing, because the basement is lit perfectly normally when you're in there, but the door to get into the basement looks like it's a doorway down into hell. It's completely dark.
Oh, the fact that she's, as we'll see, because I'm playing through it now, the fact that she's horizontal kind of gives me, mentioning The Exorcist, it kind of gives you that kind of like, oh, like that horror beat, and you suddenly feel like, oh yeah, this is the director of The Host, right?
Yeah. So it's become a horror movie, and the question is, what the fuck is in the basement, right? And then they go down into the basement, and then it becomes this wonderful Game of Thronesy interaction of power, right? Like the housekeeper and her husband are initially like begging for the power, and then the Kim family fall down the stairs, and then the housekeeper's family is in power, and they end up once again in the living room, you know, being held ransom by a missile launcher text message button with their arms up in the air, right? And the question is, how are the Kims going to get out of this? These are all plot questions, and the plot is happening to them. This is not as a result of any real character decisions that they've made other than to install themselves in this household, right? So suddenly the Kims are out of control. The audience is level. Everyone knows everything, right? We know what was down in the basement. We know what all the family's motivations are. And suddenly, you know, the question is, how will the Kims get out of this, right? And then the Parks are coming home. They pick up the phone, they ring, they've got 8 minutes to come home, right?
Oh, and I'm talking about like a clear ticking clock.
Yeah.
We are going to be home in 7.5 minutes, so you better get on it. And it's this great sequence.
Yeah, but then suddenly the Kims are driven to violence. They attack the housekeeper and her husband to get the phone off them, to tie them up and put them in the basement. And it starts out very comedic violence, right? Like they're all piled on top of each other. My wife was laughing when she watches it, and she doesn't have a dark sense of humor. That Jessica runs to the fridge to get apricots to go and like rub not apricots, peaches, to go and rub the peaches all over the housekeepers. It's very comedic up until there's this huge tonal shift, but it's also a plot shift and it's a character shift when the housekeeper has escaped. The Parks are back in the house. And the housekeeper is running up the basement steps, screaming, "Madam, madam!" And everything is about to be blown open until Chung Suk casually kicks her down the stairs, and she falls down the stairs and cracks the back of her head. And I've got the shot in the slide of Mr. Park's reaction to that, like his horror at seeing it. And these are all like, it's so well done that, you know, this violence has escalated, and the Kims are out of control, and they're doing horrible things, but they're still giving us moments to be on their side. We are still wanting the Kims to succeed, right? That is the complete mastery that Bong Joon-ho has over us as an audience at this point. And then there's a little tiny bit of breathing space. Like what follows is a series of micro, super tense sequences, which are all plot driven. Like, will Da-hae, Park Da-hae, the daughter, will she find out that Kevin is under her bed, right? And the dog is sniffing under the bed. You know, will Mr. Kim be able to tie up, and like during this moment, it takes space. You know, there's a lot of character beats in here, so they take off some of the plot questions, so that the husband of the housekeeper who's been living in the dungeon can reveal his love for Mr. Park and how he does the motion sensor beat with his head. You've got the mother eating the noodles and telling the story of her son seeing the husband and getting scared by the ghost.
Yeah, the ghost. Yeah.
So there's all, again, it just takes a moment to breathe, and it's a very short moment, and then it will jump back in with a plot sequence, like will Kevin get caught under the bed? And then there's that most amazing sequence where, by confluence of events, the entire Kim family ends up stuck under the living room table, and Mr. and Mrs. Park are on the couch watching,
getting
wiggy, having sex, but also, again, it becomes a character and a theme thing, having sex while cosplaying being poor.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that is the level. And again, the dread, the character question, the plot question of will they get caught is so tense, so high. And you're like, oh my God, will they get caught? That it allows them to pose character questions like, oh my God, like, or reveal characters. They're not posing character questions. They're revealing character by, you know, again, reinforcing the smell of poverty, the smell of the people in the subway.
Bringing up this thing that I noticed earlier about the line that Mr. Park has this thing about not crossing lines, very important. It's like, you're allowed in my house, but don't cross the line, you know? Is an important thing to him. Yeah, I love it. Buy me drugs. It's like, talk Jordan dirty to me. Buy me drugs. Buy me drugs. Ooh, that's so dirty.
So they get out, right? The plot question resolves. Will the Kims escape the house without the Parks detecting them? And that plot question gets resolved, and it's raining, and the flood sequence happens, right? And there are some plot questions still to resolve, like what the hell are they going to do with the two people that they've tied up in the basement? But they resolve that plot question very early on by having a debate in front of Trash as they're walking home, you know, where Mr. Kim says, don't worry about it. I will deal with it. I have a plan, right? Before they get to that debate, they're walking downhill. There's a series of shots of them going down different stairwells, and the water is flowing with them. And it's like the shit of the rich is flowing down into the poor. And then
and also that strata, like they're living in the sub basement. Like when stuff happens, it's easy to be nice when you're rich. Yeah. You know, when you're poor, that's when you kick someone down the stairs, you know, because you don't have the iron of money, you know.
And then when you get to the actual impact of the flooding on their home, that sewerage is vomiting out into their home, and they're trying to save what little things that they care about from their sub-basement. That scene is intercut with the housekeeper and her husband down in the dungeon as the housekeeper is dying from concussion, right? So this was actually, there's the business, KCRW's The Business Podcast. They interviewed the editor of Parasite, and he was like, or Kim Masters was asking the editor, like, how much editing do you actually do when this is so well storyboarded and there's such long takes? And he's like, well, one of the things I found in the edit was the intercutting of like the vomiting in the toilet in the basement versus the toilet in the sub-basement apartment vomiting out sewerage, and those kind of moments to reinforce like the poverty of these different groups. So again, the plot question gets taken away, and you start going like, well, what is this movie about? Like that flood sequence, you don't know what's going to happen next. There's no foreshadowing. There's no overarching tension. They're letting us off because we've just been through an incredibly tense sequence. But now that whole flooding sequence is prompting us to go, what is this film about? Why are we watching this?
And where do we go from here? It means that we're entering the third act with part of the audience question is, where do we go from here? There's an uncertainty. First part of it is, you know, the Kims getting themselves installed. Will they get caught? And then it becomes this tense sequence, which is like, no, they've escaped, but you're feeling that it's on this knife's edge and we don't exactly sure where it's going to go. Like, are they going to go back after this flooding, right? Can they go back? And that's related to them then getting, new clothes, et cetera, because they're going to have that stench of the flood. The idea that the people in the subway have the smell, they're going to have the smell of mildewy clothes.
Well,
right?
and sewerage.
And sewerage,
And then the next sequence is the fucking planning of the birthday party. And again, there's no overriding plot question, really.
Other than what the hell is going to happen, which is, I'm actually going to flick back to the PowerPoint because you wrote that. Like the audience question.
Yeah.
And this is like you asked, what's the difference between an audience question and a plot question? Is there's no plot question that is, what the hell is going to happen? An audience question of what the fuck is going to happen is a pretty legitimate audience question. But you can get away with that in your third act. I don't think what the fuck is going to happen you can get away with in your first act.
Yeah. And you can get away with it when that's deliberately what you're doing. Like, the filmmakers want the audience at this point to be going, what the fuck am I watching, right? And, they reinforce the smell. They reinforce, there's all these shots of like them, like you said, picking out clothes in this gymnasium where they've slept, right? In contrast to Mrs. Park going through her beautiful wardrobe. Like the contrasts are so deliberate and stark in this montage as they're preparing for the birthday party, right? Then what is the plot question is, how is this all going to resolve? Essentially, like you said, you can get away with this at the third act, but what elevates this film, what made this film resonate with so many people,
there is a plot question, right? But it's not a specific one. But it's important because it adds that suspense, is that we know that the subterranean dweller, I can't remember his name, the ghost, is still alive. Or we suspect he's still alive. He is something he is the ticking bomb under the house that adds tension to everything. So so the audience question is, when is this bomb going to go off? There's not a plot question in that sense of here's the task that they need to do and they either complete it or not. What there is when is the bomb going to go off? That is an audience question. Again, coming to what the fuck now becomes, when is this bomb going to...
Yeah. And before they let the bomb go off, what is really wonderful is they so first of all, in the gymnasium before the party day, at night, Mr. Kim has a monologue about plans and how don't have plans because life will fuck you. Like, it's basically the espousal of what it's like to be poor from his point of view. I don't have the script highlighted to find some lines from it, but
it's a shame because the script wouldn't have got blocked.
I can try and find it now.
And obviously it's a nice little payoff, coming to set off payoffs with the fact that they are all, because they've clearly set up that Dajong is which relates to the lights. Dajong is a Boy Scout. He's really into this stuff. And it means that they're all dressed up as Indians, which is just a great visual. It's like paying off this visual setup to add this level of absurdity to what we're about to see. And it's all in daylight, right? Rather than it being this very dark, dim horror sequence. It's actually playing out in daylight, which gives it more like a Haneke feel. I don't know. Like it almost feels like it's turning into Haneke. Is it the piano teacher where she just walks up and stabs the guy?
Or Hidden, which all happens in broad daylight as well.
Yeah.
I found the script. I found the monologue. So here it is. Do you want to know how to make a foolproof plan? How? Don't plan at all. Have no plan. If you plan, something will always go wrong. That's life. Look around. Do you think these people got up this morning and said, tonight I'm going to sleep on a dirty floor with hundreds of strangers? This is very coronavirus relevant, but look where they are now. Look where we are. That's why you should never plan. If you don't have a plan, you can't fail. You can't do anything wrong. Doesn't matter if you kill someone or commit fucking treason, more foreshadowing. Nothing fucking matters, you understand? And that is again, it's thematic because there's no plot question at this point in time. It allows the theme of the film to bubble up.
Yeah, makes us ask that the audience question is, what is this film all about? And it's like, and what's interesting is they went from a plan, having a plan, to plans don't matter. We are too subservient to the winds of floods, right? Because we don't have power.
Yeah.
And that's important. Like, you're right. It's worth mentioning because you know, in terms of the isolation and COVID-19 and stuff like that, like we are actually seeing more inequality. Oh, look at me. I'm a rich celebrity in my condo complaining about isolation. That's very different to like a family of 10 living in a fucking trailer park, right? And the politicians and people making decisions about isolation are doing it based on their personal circumstances, which are probably, if not entirely, very different than a lot of people. You know, and even those that are supposedly representing the working class. Anyway, enough with me having a political rant.
Well, it's like I love to cook, and I'm posting all my photos of cooking, you know, and getting reminded of my privilege that there are a whole lot of people out there who couldn't afford to panic buy and hoard food.
Or as I posted on my Instagram, you know, good morning to everyone except those who know how to, you know, bake gorgeous baked foods from home. So, you know, that's you, Jazz. I pretty much posted that in there just benefit, because you're like, oh, hey guys, sorry, you know what I did today. Here's my, you know, Guinness and steak pie.
So the party builds and builds, and it's all about rubbing the Kims' faces in the inequality in that montage. That is all that it's about. It's like, you know, she comments on, after the rain, there's no pollution and it's so lovely. You know, it reinforces the smell aspect. They're cooking this amazing food. They've got an opera singer, all that stuff. And it's important to note that in that moment, Kevin...
And I think for Mr. Kim, sorry, it's worth pointing. It's Mr. Kim realizing that, because the sequence of them lying on the house, it's like, oh, it's like we own the place.
Yeah.
Right? It's like them feeling like they're living this rich life, and have this conversation about Jessica feels like she fits in. The flood is this reminder of, no, you fucking don't.
Yeah.
Right? Just because they let you inside the house doesn't mean you're part of the family.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's a really important character reminder, particularly for Mr. Kim, because that is what motivates him to do.
Yeah. And so it's necessary character building so that you are with Mr. Kim and you buy that moment, right? But it is character, not plot, right? So and then in that moment where before the plot question of, before they open the basement door again, right? Kevin, Jessica, and Mrs. Kim, Chung Suk, they all express concern about the people in the basement. I think Chung Suk even has a line of like, oh my God, things got way out of hand last night. Take them some food, kind of thing. Right? And then you've got the batshit bananas of it all unfolding. And that's where the plot, it becomes a horror movie again. Like Kevin opens the door, the deranged ghost bashes Kevin's head in with the fucking the landscape rock, and he comes out to attack Chung Suk and instead like stabs Jessica. And what the blocking of that whole scene, it puts them in a situation. Chung Suk stabs the ghost, and it puts Mr. Kim, Mr. Park, the father, the patriarch, has no idea what the fuck is going on. There's crazy people stabbing each other at his son's birthday party. His son has fainted and he wants to get the car keys so he can take his son to the hospital. And Mr. Kim throws the keys, they're under the body, and Mr. Park, as he's lifting up this dying man who loves him, who just screamed respect in Mr. Park's face, he's complaining about the smell, like he's holding his nose. So there's that reinforcement that drives Mr. Kim to stab Mr. Park.
Yeah, it's the rich do not give a fuck about you.
Yeah.
You know, I am sharing the video again, but I'm not going to play like a chunk of it skimming does it. Skimming won't trigger the thing, and I've mirrored it too. We'll see. But it's but it also creates a character decision for Mr. Kim.
Yeah.
You know, which is, do they reveal is their loyalty to their fake identities more important than their family?
Well, no, I guess that question is posed, but it's answered immediately. Like Mr. Park, not understanding that Jessica is Mr. Kim's daughter, is telling Mr. Kim, come and drive my son to the hospital while, Mr. Kim is trying to save his daughter's life as she's bleeding out. Right? This catharsis scene is amazing. This film is amazing. But I'm actually, in my analysis, I'm kind of scooting over the top of it because it is a perfect unfolding of everything that's set up. And what I'm actually interested about is what happens at the end of the film after that scene, which is the double ending and the final frames of the scene. So the film fades out as Mr. Kim escapes. Oh, hi guys, can you come back later?
This feels like very much like a live.
That's my children live on the internet. Great. Something I've avoided my most of my adult life. But then
thankfully I was screen sharing, so they were very, very tiny.
Okay, great. So the double ending and the final frame. So it fades out. There's this sequence of, it tells us that Jessica has died, that Kiwoo and his mother Chung Suk are tried for petty crimes because they didn't actually do much beyond forgery and fraud, like in the scheme of things.
Largely, they were actually, sounds like the reason they got away with it is they were good at their jobs. And I think that's an important thing. They got the jobs through fraud.
Yeah.
But they were good at them at least to the point where the family didn't notice.
Yeah. Kiwoo learns that his father is now stuck in the basement of the house, living out his kind of penance for murdering Mr. Park. And then Kiwoo engages, the film goes on Kiwoo's fantasy as he dreams of becoming wealthy and buying the house and letting his father out and hugging his father in the sunshine. Right?
God, I dream of hugging my father now.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dad, if you're watching.
And so we're watching this, right? And the film fades out and it kind of lends us to believe, oh, maybe that is actually, because we've just seen it happen, maybe that is actually what happens. But the film then fades back in on the same fucking socks in the window shot that that the film opened on. And it then tilts down to find Kiwoo looking sadly at us. And we know he's never going to fucking earn the money to buy that house. So it's a very sort of bleak ending, right? But the fact that it matched that frame from the end to the beginning is something that I didn't do on the first watch, but on the rewatch, it made me go, because in the beginning, the word parasite is written in the window frame. It made me go, what is the parasite? And so it's asking a thematic question with the end framing of the film.
Well, it is. And I think the idea is, part of the basement moment is this idea that, because they talk about the husband, the ghost, I have the word, stealing food, like taking food, and that she eats for two and all that stuff, that they're also parasites, that they're parasites living off the host body, which is the rich.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, who was it? There was some billionaire that was like their favorite film. What was it? Elon Musk. It was like their favorite film of 2019 was Parasite. And everyone's like, dude, like, you realize this is about you, but he's like, probably like, oh no, it's about the working class being parasites that eat off the rich. He didn't say that, but there's like an interpretation where it's like, well, actually, no, you could take it the other way. Right.
So given the film ends with final frame looking at Kiwoo, you could, you could say he is the parasite, right? That's one way of looking at it. You could say that wealth inequality is the parasite on society. I don't know. The fact is, the film is structured and then visually driven in a way that poses the question at the end, parasite. And it just made me think, I think the whole thesis of this, by going through all these sequences and saying at each sequence, what is the question that the filmmakers are making the audience ask? It reveals two things. One is that the filmmakers are so in control that they know at each sequence what is the audience asking. And then it made me go, is this what actually, you know, like elevated genre, it's such a wanky term, but is this what it means? Is it genre films where the filmmakers are in so much control that they're making the audience ask thematic questions?
I suspect that's, well, my joke about elevated genre films from a cultural perspective was they're genre films that you can talk about at a dinner party. Back in that time when you could have dinner parties, when, you know, you could have people that over at your house, right? But I think you're probably right that there's a lot of genre films that have something to say, but they don't have a sequence that forces the audience to ask that question. A classic art house, what does this all mean? Sequence, right?
Yeah.
Whereas either in the style or, so I'm thinking the Babadook as an example of elevated genre, and I can't remember the Babadook specifically having a sequence where you go, what does this all mean? But it feels like that is kind of the opening and the closing. There's definitely that connection to kind of like postnatal depression that a film seems to give the audience a moment to ask, right? So
well,
I think you're probably
the dramatic
right.
choice in the Babadook is do you remember in the basement, the Babadook being the father and posing the question like, murder your son to get me back.
Yeah.
And so they've done it differently. They haven't like had a sequence which is posing what is this film all about, but they've made it the dramatic choice at the end of the film.
All right. So are we done discussing the film? Is there anything you want to kind of circle back on?
Tall Paul has asked how many macro sequences do we feel the script has? So I feel like, just broadly, correct me if I'm wrong here, Stu, I feel like there's the opening sequence, which is introducing the given circumstances of the family. There's then, it's a series of micro sequences, but one overarching sequence of how will the Kim family infiltrate the Park family, and it's broken up into each character, like Kevin, Jessica, Ki-taek, and Chung-suk. And then there's a little break before the midpoint, which is then a horror sequence of what is in the basement. I then think there's the sequence of the Parks coming home and will the Kims escape undetected from the house.
Mm-hmm.
There's the flood sequence. Then there's a mini sequence with the birthday party before they've opened the basement, which is a non-plot driven sequence. Then you've got, from the opening of the basement, the horror catharsis of the birthday party, and then the final
right.
epilogue.
That's 8, 10? Someone hopefully was counting. I wasn't what I meant to count. It's 8 or 10, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not one of those people that films are clearly 8 sequences or 10 sequences. They're how many sequences make sense, right? And they also give a sense of pacing because obviously the longer that sequence is, the slower a film's going to feel. And, you know, there's been observations that, you know, this film accelerates. A lot of films do accelerate. And that's because they've got the sequences are longer at the beginning. You know, you might have an act of 2 sequences, maybe 3 sequences, and then you get kind of more condensed at the end. So, you know, anywhere from 7 to 20 minutes can be a sequence. Yeah. So I reckon we take some back matter questions. There's a 20-second delay between us on Zoom and you guys in the live chat. So why don't you, like, I don't really have any other observations directly about Parasite until we ask. I've already made the observation about us being ahead and behind the characters and that relating to how we feel the Kim question is. But I did use that during a writer's room this week with the question about how to make a character feel intelligent. And it's like, you know, let's put the audience behind them when we see the plan unfold, and we're going to assume that they're a really smart character, because intelligence, I mean, one, there's just a whole bunch of culturally loaded questions about intelligence, but in terms of the question. So how about we take some back matter questions now, and
should I do the wrap up and thank our Patreons before we transition into back matter?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so many thanks to everyone who supports us just by sharing the word or actually with money, as our patrons do. If you want more Draft Zero more often, please do go to our Patreon page, which can be found at www.draft-zero.com. Particular thanks to Chris Walker and Alexandra Brundrett, who are interns, and then to our super Patreons, Chris Walker, Jack Smith, Jesse Laurie, Matteo Bernardini, Nick MacArthur, Sandra Willis, whose birthday it is this week. Happy birthday, Sandra. Theus Bergstrom, and Crob Edmonds, who is in the chat. Crob, welcome. All right, so one of the thoughts that we had about our things to tackle in back matter is, I guess, how to put a measure of accountability on ourselves as writers during this time. I mean, what we found out recently, friends of the podcast, script pipeline competition. Stu and I have a project that placed really well there last year, and they've been really supportive of our podcast. They've created a mix of drinks for on Twitter for 3 hours leading straight into this. So if there's any script pipeline mixers who've hung on throughout this live stream, welcome. Stu, what have you done to sort of create accountability for yourself during this time?
Wow. Accountability for myself. I mean, we mentioned this last week. We're doing the Discord. What I think we've done to refine that this week, which came from Paul, is in the live chat at the moment, was this idea of talking about wins rather than what did you achieve? What kind of win did you have? Because I think that's different, because achievements sound like, I set the sprinting gold record or whatever it is. And the answer is a win could be like, mate, I got out of bed. I'm that sounds like I'm being facetious, but some days that feels like that is the biggest win of all. So I'm in a weird position. I've suddenly become quite busy. There's a lot of spec work at the moment for me, pitching on projects, developing projects, but they themselves create a degree of accountability because I have to hand in something, like I've got a pitch due or I've got an edit due. I'm applying for funding applications, et cetera, et cetera. So those deadlines create a sense of focus, because otherwise it's pretty easy to just to stare out the window for an hour and just go, oh, it's all fucked.
I mean,
have you talked about, I may have not been paying attention. Did you talk about competitions?
No. So that's what I was going to drift into is, even outside of before Corona isolation, there's something about deadlines that drives productivity. And look, we're not here to try and shame you guys into writing more. I'm particularly reinforcing the point of view that it's okay at this time to be anxious and to just deal with your anxiety and to survive. But if you do want to, somehow increase your writing productivity at this time, having deadlines is great. And often those are self-imposed deadlines, which are the ones that are easy to fly past. And that's where things like online screenplay competitions, not that I want to plug those. We have a whole episode where we dissect what we believe the value of online screenplay competitions to be in the podcast feed. But just the idea that there is a deadline. So, we've talked about friends of the podcast Script Pipeline a couple of times already, and they've got a deadline. Is it May 1st?
May 1st?
Yeah. And actually, this is the time of year when there's a lot of deadlines. I think Final Draft Big Break is around April, May. Austin Film Festival is around April, May. I believe the Nichols is around April, May. Page Awards. I don't know. There's a lot of and is there some AWG?
Yeah, there's definitely the usual. AWG is made there. Algies, which is for produced scripts, free this year, which is awesome. But they also have the Monty Miller. They just closed 2019, but they'll have the 2020 and the John Hine coming up, which is for John Hine's for both produced and unproduced. And then obviously there's the Script Pipeline 2020 season. I think what's interesting about competitions is, as much as they're a deadline to hand in something, they're also a deadline to let go.
Yep.
Right? As in
to finish a project or call it finished, to stop working on it.
or at that point of time to stop giving a fuck, because, you know, perfectionism is the enemy of good. And, you know, I've just handed in 2 funding I've done 3 funding applications this year. And as anyone who's done like an Australian funding application is, for the Americans this might be a bit different, but Australia, it's the way I describe it, it's somewhere between handing in a 10 to 20,000 word essay. Like, I swear, some of these applications are like 20,000 words all up between the different documents. We're talking about like a master's thesis. And
and it's a fucking lottery ticket. Imagine to enter the lottery, you had to write 20,000 words to enter the lottery.
It's hard work. It can be really demotivating for that reason, because it's like, well, it's not even a lottery, because you don't feel like it's random.
Yeah.
You know that it's not going to be draw a name out of the hat, but it's like only 4 people are going to pass, and they're probably going to be the teacher's pets anyway. The reason to do them is, one, they force you to do the work, particularly if you're in development, because development is hard. As in to motivate yourself to sit there and write character bios and stuff. But the other thing is they force you to go, okay, this is kind of good enough, you know, for this stage of the process. So I think competitions could be really useful if you're developing a script to go, I'm going to get to 120 pages and 115 pages. And yeah, okay, they can cost money, but not thinking about them making a career. But I'm paying $50 to call this draft done. You know, there is that. I love it. It comes to, you know, screenplays, and this is true of all art, but, you know, screenplays are never finished. Or films are never finished. They're only abandoned. I think that's true of screenplays as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I think that's a good way to have accountability. And there's also day-to-day accountability. So we mentioned that Discord and that idea of kind of just setting yourself really low goals. I'm going to do 1 page today. I'm going to do 3 pages today. And you tick that off. If that is what works for you, if this is not something that is a healthy thing for you to do, in terms of your mental health, it just makes you more anxious. Don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually enjoyed hearing from some professional Hollywood writers on, you know, podcasts like Script Notes or The Business or whatever that I listen to or follow on Twitter. And they've been saying, we have paid work. We are still fully employed at this time, but we are struggling to deliver on it given the circumstances. So it's just, obviously that is the height of privilege, but it's also to say, like, if people of that level are struggling, it's okay for people of our level to struggle even more, taking the classist view of Parasite into account. It's okay to feel like we're subject to floods.
That's what this is. Like, this is I don't want to say, it's like, whoever saw this coming, you know, well, I don't know, like, if you know anything about human history, kind of plagues wiping things out is pretty, not wiping things out, but kind of disrupting is pretty common. Is there any other comments? We've got Dubai Powers asking about whether Knives Out is elevated genre for the same reason that Parasite is, that it makes the audience more actively or more consciously, I think is the specific thing for me, more consciously engage with theme.
Yeah. Well, in Knives Out, it was that scene that I deliberately pulled up where Knives Out is all fucking plot and setup. And there was one scene where there was 0 plot and 0 setup that was all about children's in cages and what is America for and rich versus poor. And like, yes, very much Knives Out drew its audience's attention to the underlying issues that Rian Johnson wanted to explore. You know, and Get Out famously does the same thing. And I think, but there are different ways to do it. Like you raised in the Babadook, I don't think there's a scene or a sequence that forces the audience to go, what is this film about? And I think Paul Verhoeven does the same kind of thing. He doesn't have a sequence where he stops the plot to force you to ask, what is this film all about? He builds it through his work.
And also the style. And when we talk about Watchmen next week, so similar time next week, we've got Mel Killingsworth on. We're going to be talking about Watchmen, which means not just the HBO TV series, but the Zack Snyder film and the comic book. Because I think the comic book specifically is its elevated genre in that the comic wants you to be thinking, what is this about? What is the meaning of this? What is the theme about this? And that the style, the narrative style, as well as the directorial style, and we got to work out a way to do this without, so we can show the directing without it being blocked, can undercut some of that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm looking forward to the Watchmen episode. Crob asks, has Stu brought up Star Wars yet? And the answer is no. We've had a Star Wars free episode for once.
Well, coming back to elevated genre, I definitely think there's moments in The Last Jedi, speaking of Rian Johnson, where it's specifically forcing you to go, what is this film about? And it's not just telling you, like the Rise of the Skywalker is telling you this is about, like, good people will fight if we lead them. That's it in terms of like complicated thematic questions that you're able to engage with. Last Jedi is definitely a lot more about, so what does Star Wars mean? What does the Force mean? What does the Jedi mean? Like, that's all the stuff on Act 2 feels like it's forcing you, it's slowing down the plot questions to force you to engage with Star Wars on a thematic level, which for a lot of people is very challenging.
Yeah, which they hated.
Because the
whole Canterbite sequence.
Oh, actually, yeah, Rian Johnson, we talked about that briefly on Knives Out, the Canterbite sequence where they're talking about like war profiteering and all that stuff. It felt very un-Star Wars because we're used to having a moment in Star Wars. And then suddenly it makes us ask a whole lot of questions about the economy in Star Wars. How do the economics in Star Wars work? Yeah, like who funds these wars and all that stuff, like, which is exactly what's kind of happening with like, how are we suddenly funding all this welfare expenditure? It's like the government borrows money from banks at very low interest rates on behalf of the taxpayers, but slash inflation, which is, do we just print more money and then we hope that by the time inflation kicks in, it's still keeping money flowing through the system. Anyway, we should just have my dad on to talk about like Keynesian economics, given that he was an economist. Imagine that. Oh, God. Barry on Draft Zero. Oh, and is there any other questions? This is a very quiet back matter.
Yeah, I mean, we've had the chat. It's been wonderful to see you guys there. But compared to last week, you have been deliberately not interrupting us and badgering us, which I think, takes some of the fun for you guys out of it. Take a 20-second pause as we wait for questions.
Yeah. As I'm drinking, we should just do beer reviews. I'm currently drinking the Huge Kahuna. Oh, God, we can't do this on YouTube. I shouldn't show you the bottle. It's a Imperial Coconut Brown Ale by Batch.
I'm also drinking Batch. So I enjoyed very much the South Pacific Ale. I chose the Dawn India Red IPA as a follow-up. And you know me, I don't like hoppy beers. I don't like IPAs, and I was hoping.
Oh, but a red IPA. Oof.
I was hoping, but the malt was not enough. It was still too hoppy for me. So I've gone back to just a Stone and Wood classic Pacific Ale.
Interesting. I wonder if that will change, because this is an old batch. This is like I bought this really cheap. It's normally like $20 a bottle, and I bought it $7 a bottle because it was bottled in 2018. It's nearly a 2-year-old beer. But that means that kind of the flavor profile changes. So like an IPA or a red IPA will get maltier the older as it is, because the freshness will drop. So sometimes there is an argument. If you don't want that grassy kind of mosaic-y, hoppy thing, you want more of the malt base that you let it age. Gosh, that is drafty RAUGHT0.
Anyway, thanks, Stu. I think this has been good. Hopefully, I also think this episode will make a good podcast if I ever find the bandwidth to, clean them up and edit them for audio.
One more shout out to high level Draft Zero longtime patron Sandra, whose birthday's this week. So happy birthday for Wednesday.
I did do a shout out for your mum while you.
You're not meant to say it's mum. It makes it sound more. It makes it sound like we're being more. Okay, cool. Thanks for ruining it.
We can cut it out of.
Well, it's not going to be in the broadcast. It could be in the live stream.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I always appreciate your questions as well.
I wonder if they actually watched live. It'd be interesting. We did all this work with the PowerPoint presentation and video, and to the point where we got streamed, and we got some shade about using PowerPoint, and they didn't stream live. That's
I have my rescue cat come to join me.
If you ever need a hand looking after the rescue cat during this difficult time, I'm happy to take care.
I understand your desire, but you have a crazy dog living in your house.
I don't have a crazy dog. I've got a dog that doesn't get enough attention. who probably needs to be walked for an hour a day, but the owner is essential services. So he's been he did 20 days straight.
Fucking hell.
Well, it's something, and I'm happy to talk about it this is Corona back matter, but he's a bar / cafe manager at a venue, right? So essential services and that, and they provide food. But because he's staff, they let go of all the casuals and are well, you're working, right? So it's not that he's working 20 days because he's saving lives, but because of the way the economy has worked and he's full time, they're well, we're just going to get rid of all the casuals and keep you on with your salary, and we're just going to make you work more.
Food is essential service.
Yeah. Cool. Anyway, nothing else. I guess it feels weird to finish this way, but fine.
All right, guys, we'll see you next week. And hopefully, no promises, but we'll hopefully get a classic Draft Zero episode out to you by the end of April.
Oh, it's Tuesday's favorite broadsword. I don't study broadsword. I study longsword. There's a difference because part of what and broadswords can be related to great swords. And so I have done great swords before, but I do have a very nice Federer, which is a training longsword. I'll see if I can show a photo. At one point, I am going to do a podcast about fencing and how it relates to scenes. This is my Federer slung on my backpack when I was cycling around, and I nearly picked a fight and went, no shit, I'll draw it out. It's a very nice, because they've tapered the edge, so it kind of goes like that. So it's got a very fast point, so it's very quick to get on point. So it's got the power of a longsword, which is two-handed and uses a lot of your get a lot of power to weight ratio out of it, but it's got this the accuracy of a rapier in terms of a point. It's a very nice sword, and very good for feigning, which is not something that happens in longsword very much. Kind of feigning around the blade. You can use it a little bit more like a rapier. To the point where I was using that as a crutch, and that the good fencers would kind of realize that I was about to feint them, and then would defeat my feint, which defeats the point of a feint. Swords. I miss hitting people with swords.
Crop, you asked me for a review of my broadsword. I don't fight broadsword. I do longsword, side sword, and rapier, but I own 2 longswords. This is my training longsword. It's a very particular type in that you'll notice that it's got this tapered blade. It narrows towards the tip, which means it's still got quite a good blade authority in the strong of the blade. As long as you get a good crossing, here down, you'll do pretty well. But this means it's very fast, more like a rapier. Right, and it's got good flex, so it's safe to hit people with. And I also like the flat pummel. One, it's more historically accurate and looks cooler, but also it means that when your hand's down here, you can kind of get a sense of the orientation of the blade, which is pretty important. Down there.
Congratulations. The illustrations made the stream lots more interesting. It was very interesting. Thanks for remembering Sandra's birthday and for my economics prompts over the years. Right.
Well,
yes,
that's a much better review than we got last week.
Yeah. Well, if I say that he turned me into Keynesian, John Keynesian, he'll be very happy. So yeah, that's a good place to end. Glad the illustrations made everything better. All right, we're going to end now.
Ciao.